do what you can with the resources that you have. And so you just end up being a little scrappier. You have to both be extremely focused and very precise in your prioritization and what you're working on, but you have to be incredibly agile with changing it up.
Hello and welcome to Under the Banner. I'm your host, Ollie James. Today's guest is Nola Solomon, a multilingual go-to-market leader who scaled commerce media platforms across 3 continents. She's long championed privacy-safe advertising and first-party data strategies well before cookies began to crumble. Nola is a French-American multilingual storyteller. She served as SVP Global Go-to-Market at Criteo, where she aligned product, marketing, and commercial teams behind the company's commerce media roadmap. Before that, she headed AdSmart Programmatic at NBCUniversal, scaling the advertising strategy across the network's national portfolio of brands, including Peacock, and held earlier roles at the Trade Desk, Dailymotion, and AOL. With AI promising lightning-fast optimization but rising compute costs, we dive into how Adtech is evolving, where she spots the biggest efficiency leaks and the workflow gains she's seen from tools to processes to everyday lives. Grab your coffee. Let's get started. Nola Solomon, welcome to Under the Banner.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying the summer and excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, fantastic. We were introduced at Cannes Lions Festival that's just gone. How was the event for you?
Oh my God, it was amazing. I had been to Cannes a few times, and this was by far, I think, the most fun and the most productive one I've ever had. And the excitement around what was happening with AI, what's happening in our industry, some of the developments, just the momentum and kind of positivity everybody was having was like really inspiring.
Yeah, it was a fab time this year, and not crazily hot, although it was getting there. But I kind of felt, especially towards the last couple of days, that things started to calm down in the temperature wise. But anyway, let's zoom back out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you arrived here today?
Yeah. Well, I've been all over the world actually with my ad tech career adventure. I sort of fell into it completely by accident in when I was living in London getting my master's in child developmental psychology, which was a little detour I took after my time in New York in the book publishing world and editorial, which was not very forward thinking and moving quickly or all that digital at the time. So I fell into ad tech. I was in London and I just really loved the industry. I mean, I loved the people. I thought it was very fast paced, very innovative. Obviously, it was really early days in programmatic still. But there was so much opportunity to think about how do we reach people with the right types of advertisements, the right types of products in the right moment, and how do we do this in this real time ecosystems. I got hooked on it from the beginning. That journey from London led me to Singapore to build out the supply team for, at the time, Millennial Media and then AOL when we got acquired. And that just exposed me even further to the realm of the international way of ad tech and doing business and the nuances between each country and kind of thinking about advertising at a global lens. So when I came back to the US, I was lucky enough to really have that kind of global perspective. And that led me to continuing my journey across different companies on the demand side, so DSPs, as well as supply side platforms. I had a stint in the traditional media broadcast CTV world, and that brought me to my latest role at Criteo, where I was running go-to-market and commercialization for a commerce media platform and kind of the big boon on performance marketing and e-com married to retail media and commerce media. That's obviously been exploding over the last few years. And then since then, I've been striking out on my own consulting business and working on some of my own exciting entrepreneurial ventures.
Fantastic. That sounds like a fantastic career. I wonder what the shift's been like from that sort of senior executive corporate leader into something more entrepreneurial and consultancy based. How have you found that switch, and what are the key differences?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think about this a lot. So both working in as a corporate executive and working as a founder and in a more entrepreneurial methodologies are complete roller coasters, but different kinds of roller coasters. And they're both, very fun and also very frustrating. But I've actually found the transition to entrepreneurship incredibly thrilling. It's very hard, but it's very exciting, and waking up every day and really thinking about the problems that you're trying to address the best way that you think it can be done, and then bringing people along with you that also believe in that mission and helping you get there, and creating something of real value to the ecosystem and to a general type of customer potentially, or even broader than that, is just like feels like really wholehearted, I would say. Um, and I think, I I'm so grateful for the career I had in corporate, because you learn so much, right? You learn so much, not just about specific skill sets within the business world, but you understand about how to operate businesses, how to not operate businesses, what are the different functions and their relative importance at different stages of a company and a commercialization of a product, right? You could be at an established company that's got a core product launching something new and innovative. There's a whole different commercialization process you need to think about for that newer product. It's basically starting something from scratch, just incubated within a larger company, right? So taking that mindset of building something new, understanding the customer journey, the customer discovery to make sure that it's the right thing, and then how do you effectively commercialize that so you can get it adopted and bring it to scale and drive the actual value it's meant to create, and how do you iterate on that based on customer feedback? I mean, that's all the same process, right? It's just a different level of, potentially funding support or resourcing support and all those elements, but the core of it is the same. And so I think it translates really well coming from the corporate world into striking it out and building something from scratch.
We were talking a second ago, but before we switched on the camera, about our vacation times and how we have to kind of, as sole founders, sort of always be switched on. And how have you found that sort of lack of support? Could I call it that, in terms of that switch versus the corporate, the HR department that's there to support you and help you along?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I would say I wouldn't position it as like a lack of support as much as it's that you do what you can with the resources that you have. And so you just end up being a little scrappier. You have to both be extremely focused and very precise in your prioritization and what you're working on, but you have to be incredibly agile with changing it up, right?
Yeah.
And so having a holistic lens of where you're trying to go, the different potential pathways to get there, that even goes down to the different types of customers and ICPs that you have, but focusing on one, and then really challenging yourself, your team, the folks that you have working together with you towards this, to always be questioning, but also to move fast. And that means, there's the fail fast terminology, but it's try something. If it's not working, is there something that needs to be adjusted, or is it time to drop that and try a different approach completely? So it's really more about like working within the means that you have and making that work for you versus, oh, I wish I had this or that, and I can't do this because of XYZ. Like every company, no matter how well resourced you are, can benefit from extreme prioritization and focus.
Yeah, I agree. We had our mutual friend Brendan Norman, who introduced us at Cannes. He just launched his he came out of stealth mode with his AI project, Classify. We won't dig into that too much, but he's not the only person on that journey. And I wonder how much you can tell us about your project.
Yes, and Classify is just a really exciting project. I'm so excited for Brendan and the team. And there's a lot of really cool people and founder friends I have that are building really exciting AI-based offerings to solve big problems in ad tech and more broadly in the business world. So that's sort of the lens I've taken as well. Without getting into too much specificity, the biggest pain point, I'm also in stealth mode.
Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
I hope to come out soon like Brendan has. But, it's really about workflow automation, workflow efficiency, communication collaboration. How do we make AI work for us by eliminating a lot of the administrative tasks and kind of, quote unquote, boring and inefficient things that human beings have to plug in and just do and deal with. And I know I'm speaking kind of broadly, but this can apply across ad tech and orchestration. This can apply within other verticals and ecosystems that are hugely inefficient and also sometimes incredibly complex in terms of having multiple stakeholders operating against one end goal. So I liken it to, one of the areas I've been focused on in the past within the kind of property technology world is when you're planning to do a renovation, you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, the homeowner, the architect, the contractor, potentially an interior designer, and all of these systems that are being used in communication methodologies and tools are wildly, largely non-digital and hugely inefficient. And so when I think about building AI solutions, I'm always thinking about how do we make the world more efficient? Because I love efficiency.
Like, but is using AI and understanding it the same thing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you start to understand AI better by using it, but each of those has its own layers, right? Like there is so much complexity when we say AI. Like it could mean a chat bot that you're talking to help you find a recipe for tonight's dinner, right? That's using AI, and that's a certain level of understanding of how to use AI for a specific purpose. There is the foundational components of how you build natural language and LLMs to power a ton of different functionalities. There's building MCP layers to connect tools to each other more efficiently and effectively. Each of those, even myself at this point, I have just a surface level to just below surface level understanding of how that all really works. But we always think about it, I think, as people in terms of what does it create? What's the output that it creates that brings me value? And how many hops to value, like as for my use case until we get there. So I think those two things are intertwined, but they're not necessarily the same thing in terms of understanding it and using it.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking there about some actual real world improvements that we might see in our space around that kind of automation. And I think that's key because I look at some companies' announcements around their AI product innovation with a degree of sort of skepticism, really, and think, are we just launching sort of the flashy AI projects just to say we did? Are we just bolting on? Are we trying to turn our ad tech company with an AI piece? But I think I wonder if there's any sort of whether we dig into those real world improvements that we can actually see from your perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of really interesting AI developments that many founders that I know are working on. And I'll stick with kind of the world that I know and the use cases that I see within at least the business world. But obviously, we have our own use cases that we probably all understand from the consumer world, right? In terms of what's happening out there and how we're using different tools like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity and what's happening with the browsers and search. And that obviously has a huge impact in terms of use case for the consumer. But on the sort of business side, there's some really interesting deep work that's being done around how do you use AI and build out agentic systems that can help really refine and segment unstructured and structured data into quick usable outputs that drive business value. This is a huge kind of tangled mess where we know that data is everything. Data is the big differentiator in the world today. How you are able to use your data as a business is absolutely critical. And the more efficient you can do that for the less amount of work and time to create the most paths of outputs for where that can be leveraged across marketing or advertising or customer experiences or everything else becomes really valuable. And obviously as a consumer, you may only see a piece of that. You may only be visible the tip of the iceberg of everything that's happening in the background to make that happen for you in that moment, to create that value for that moment. But it really starts with some of these foundational AI elements that are being built out to support businesses at really at their spine. Other ones I think of my past, roles around go to market and commercialization and thinking about how do you more effectively reach your ICP and really sell in your story around sales enablement to drive the business growth you're looking for, and obviously make sure that the value of the output that you're creating for that customer type is well understood by the customer and quickly. There is a lot of really interesting technology that's being built by people out there right now to solve the go to market process, which is by itself a behemoth of very complex set of tasks and different types of roles and can look very different company to company. But fundamentally, what's the same is storytelling, nailing that hook, being very clear about who you're trying to reach and why and what the value is for them, and then resonating for them in the very brief amount of time that you have their attention, whether that's through cold outreach or warm introductions, or at a conference when you meet somebody, there is a finite moment that you have to really translate that. And the better prepared you are, because there are now tools that are getting you there faster, and also able to look at huge amounts more data than any individual person could possibly look at and filter through to create takeaways and learnings, becomes very powerful assistance for driving go-to-market efficiency.
And is that where the sort of generative AI converges with the agentic AI and they sort of start to work together? And I wonder if you could just clarify for anybody that's not sort of savvy with those terms, what they are and how they sort of work together in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think agentic AI has definitely been thrown around quite a lot, and it's a very cool concept of this notion of autonomous AI agents, where you have specific tasks. Tasks can be as simple as filtering through different types of data that then outputs to a different agent that takes the output of that filtered data to create a different output for a marketing use case, and then another agent that's taking that output for an advertising use case. These are, I'm oversimplifying, of course, but the concept is really that you have multiple agents, just like you have multiple people, right, that are doing a very specific role. I like to think it's actually kind of funny. So I'm half French, and the French bureaucratic system is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
There's a funny story where I promise I'll get back to AI on this, but
No, you carry on.
when I was when I the second time I moved to Paris, I needed to open a bank account, and opening a bank account should be a fairly easy thing to do when you need it for getting an apartment and all sorts of stuff, right? But it was a nearly 6-week process for me to physically go to the bank every single day and stand there and talk to 10 to 12 different people who each individually owned a portion, only a very specific portion of the whole path to me opening up a bank account, right? No one person could do the whole thing. 3 people couldn't do the whole thing. And this person did this piece, this other person handled this form, and this, and then, it was, and then this, and then this, and then this. And I always thought, my goodness, like, how wildly inefficient. And it is when you're dealing with human beings that are operating that way. But how efficient does it become when that is, each of those are being done by an AI agent, right? And their specific tasks that they're able to do in seconds, milliseconds, is being passed through. And suddenly you have a bank account opened in 10 minutes or less, right? Even though you have maybe 12 different agents that are working on different pieces of it.
Yeah, and I wonder how complicated that would be as an Englishman trying to open a French bank account as not a native French speaker. So that's a nice.
Yeah, the translator that's the translator agent gets added in.
I just came back from France and I was using was involved in a fender bender, I think you guys call it, in a car park, and we got ChatGPT. Somebody reversed into me. It wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
I will add that. But ChatGPT was there and completely translated, understood. I explained the situation to, I was on my iPhone, explained the situation to it, and it was able to translate effectively, super effectively, between me and the other party without me having to give it another prompt. It sort of waited, it listened, it translated, it made suggestions, and we were able to get all the paperwork signed in. Signed up, and the process was quite, it was as stress-free as it could be when you've just, damaged your rental car.
Yeah.
Super interesting sort of how it was able to to take that situation and make it less stressful and give us a good outcome. So
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. I mean, there's so many like quick use cases like that exist. I mean, this whole concept of translation is fascinating. I mean, it's only going to get better and better. Like, very soon there's going to be methodologies that don't even require you to go into ChatGPT and put in prompts and have the conversation and then, show it to the other person.
Yeah, I'll look back on that as being quite basic, I guess. And
Yeah.
it'll go through your AirPods, I guess, and automatically, there'll be like a Star Trek, like all of these things that we used to watch. Well, I used to watch on Star
Yeah.
Trek seem to
Yeah.
be coming
Me
true.
too. It's good fun. I love sci-fi.
All right, let's get back into the AI products. Given that's where you're at, I wonder how you think about the holistic picture, specifically around picking the tools that matter and how you get clarity on costs and speed and sustainability, whilst keeping everything on track?
Yeah, no, those are all great points and questions. So I think there's two elements when I think about it from starting building a product from scratch with really AI as the focus, because, well, there is the product you're actually building and the value that it's creating to your customer, the consumer, the world, and how are you facilitating that with AI? And are you doing that because foundationally it creates value by being foundationally an AI product, or is AI only a component of the product, which is fine. There's no right or wrong, right? There's going to be products of all sorts. And then, like, how do you then over index your investment in AI based upon, is it foundational to how your product operates in order to bring the value, or is it a component piece of the way your product operates to bring the value? And those are two different things, and they're both using AI, but they're using them in different ways, and they're potentially using them to different degrees of level of investment that you need to think about, both in terms of cost, in terms of the sustainability factors of what's happening with AI and what that's going to mean for your business, if that's something that you want to stay focused on, which obviously I think you and I both think is important.
Yeah.
But then there's also, how do you operate your business internally amongst your teams to create more efficiencies? So we're entering a world now where you don't need to have hundreds of people at a startup to operate the startup. You really only need a handful of, a couple handfuls of people that have very specialized skill sets and are able to think really strategically, but also learn and operate agilely, leveraging AI tools amongst themselves, right? And then that creates a ton of both efficiency in terms of workflow and, again, more automation internally in terms of how the business operates, but also a lot of reductions in other types of costs that you might otherwise need to worry about as a business. I think on the sustainability front, it's still so early. Obviously, how foundational AI is to your product functioning is going to heavily impact that, because I think there was an interesting article, I think it was by Sam Altman, I read last week, although last week feels like a month ago. So, um,
Yeah.
where one chat GPT query uses the same amount of energy as 10 Google search queries,
Yep.
which is crazy, right? And so if you think about it through that lens, and then every subsequent, ChatGPT query you're doing, you realize very quickly how much energy is being used to just do simple functions today. What does that energy translate into? We're talking about electricity often. That can translate into water, which is obviously a hugely important resource for us as animals and human beings to stay alive on this planet. And there's a lot of different innovation happening there. But finding ways to be able to leverage AI in more sustainable ways is, I think, should something to keep top of mind. It may not be immediately solvable for every single founder, for every single company, but having that thought and that lens from the beginning, I think, is helpful, because that may influence some of the decisions you make in terms of where and how to use these different tools. And then also obviously keep a lens on, if you are growing and you are able to put in more efficient ways or update your tooling to more efficient systems that are going to come into existence that maybe don't exist today, then you can be part of the journey towards more sustainable growth in a world that's just becoming more and more digital.
And you've written about this. You've written about the water scarcity, and I know that you were physically building wells as a sabbatical. So this is something that given this is something that you clearly actually care about. Can we dig into that a little bit? I'm
Yeah.
interested to hear your history and how you think, what we can do ultimately in order to kind of to do our bit and improve things.
Yeah. I mean, so I was very fortunate that as a teenager, my parents took my sisters and I on a humanitarian mission to Kenya for about a month, where we laid water pipes so that a village in rural Kenya would have running water, because otherwise they had to walk 5 miles a day to the nearest watering hole, which wasn't particularly clean water either. and then walk back, right, with buckets. And that's obviously a completely different and challenging way of accessing water. So the mission was really around how do we bring the water to the villages, and how do we take it from its source and move it up, in some cases uphill. And so there was a lot of infrastructure that was getting built in rural Kenya to lay these water pipes into the ground that then had pumping mechanisms to push the water, to do some cleanup and desalination of the water that was in the watering hole and the wells there, and then pump them up into the villages so that the villages would have like an access point and didn't have to walk, very far to get access to clean water. And that was like a very both humbling but also eye-opening experience in terms of the, I mean, many things, of course, but the value and importance of water, and how scarce it is in some places and how overabundant it is in others that gets wasted and taken advantage of and not thought about. And that's always stuck with me. I mean, my father is a nonfiction author and has written about water issues in the world and kind of the importance of water as a critical resource for the earth, right? And
Yeah.
so I always think about that. And when I remember he once was telling me about how much water is wasted in agriculture. You don't think about these things, right? As just an average person going about your day to day. And so having a lens of something that you care about, something that's critically important for the survival of mankind, how do you apply the usage or wastage, or hopefully creating efficiencies or reuse of that resource in a world that's becoming more digital and with I think is a very worthwhile way to think about innovation.
Sure. And I guess, I mean, agriculture might be more obvious, but our digital infrastructure is far from water free. I mean, the data center cooling can consume what, millions of liters a day. I wonder whether or how the media and tech industries should account for their usage and the impact. Should we be including water metrics in sustainability dashboards or reporting on them? And if so, like, what do we then do with the data?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's always great to understand, what does it cost to operate your business? And I say cost in the broadest term of the word, because we always think of cost as in money, and of course you need to think about it as in money too. But what is the cost of resource? And that can come in the form of electricity, can come in the form of water. You can translate, just like you can translate, teaspoons to tablespoons to cups, right? It's the same thing. You're translating money and time costs to energy and electricity to water, right? And it just depends on through what lens do you want to look at it, through what lens do you want to track it, and then what are your goals towards reducing the negative impact and ideally even augmenting a positive impact of it. How can you reuse these resources so that they're cyclically, like a flywheel effect of itself, versus having to mine for more of it and suck up more of it, right? And so I think deciding as a business, as founders, as companies, what matters the most to you, through what lens do you want to look at and have that KPI that you're tracking. If you have too many KPIs you're tracking, I feel like it's impossible to becomes overwhelming, right? It's like
Yeah.
impossible to hit the mark on all of them. So like, which ones are the ones you're really gonna put your heart and soul into?
I was thinking maybe we should just dig into KPIs as in general as well, because I'm not a massive fan of them. I look at EBITDA now, and that's my kind of metric. And it just earnings before interest. I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's a number that I look at. It's probably the non vanity metric, because it looks at your revenue without all of the other factors that you essentially can't control. So I wonder if we're looking, EBITDA as a founder, as a CEO is kind of essential for me and the board. What are the other KPIs that you would use within your business that actually helps you, that are meaningful and helps you stay on track, specifically within an AI startup?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's your traditional business KPIs that you just need to kind of have and operate on because the world operates on them, right?
Yeah.
So to some degree you need to have those. One that I really think about a lot is sort of this KPI around net outcome. which I'm sort of like maybe making up. I'll explain it. Um, um, it's really like, what's the ultimate return on investment post all the costs that are associated to getting that performance? So that can be something like, all right, we have a certain number of FTE, we have a certain amount of their time and resource that's getting associated to doing a certain job or creating a certain output. We have compute power, right, which by itself can be broken down into multiple things. What are all the elements that touch the creation of a specific output and value that we're generating as a business? What's the net outcome of all of that when you think about all of the costs that went into getting that done? And does the value of the output outweigh the overall cost, and by what delta, right? And when you think about like profitability, conceptually that's the same thing, but you're not always thinking about all of the elements that go into what it takes to turn something profitable. So that's kind of maybe my slightly more granular, slightly more idealistic way of thinking about it.
No, I like it. I like it. Although I very rarely talk about profitability. I always tell people it's contribution margin rather than profit margin, because somebody it'll end up being spent on something or invested somewhere. And this idea of making it'd be great to make a profit. I think we're maybe sort of break even ish at the moment. But yeah, contribution margins over profitability.
I like that. There's actually a book that I read recently called Profit First. And what really resonated for me for that, and actually it ties back to something we talked about earlier, is operating within your means, right? So, like, if your focus is on having a business where you are going to be able to live off of this business, right? Then you need to be always operating within a certain level of profitability margin that you are saving aside. And then everything else outside of that, whatever X percentage, right, that you've carved out, which obviously the book has recommendations for, that's what gets reinvested into your business in the variety of ways that you invest. But everything else is protected. So you actually only spend what you have to spend and not more, which is the vicious cycle people and companies find themselves in, where they can never really get out of it because they haven't structured themselves to be that kind of rigorous with how they're kind of handling the financial part of it.
Yeah, and once you have to, and if you're raising money and you're spending other people's money, then you have a sort of a responsibility towards them as well. And I've seen a lot of companies you have to back yourself. I'm not saying, and you have to believe in yourself. I'm not saying you shouldn't make investments, but I agree 100% that you shouldn't spend money that you don't have and be too speculative with it, or hire. I think a lot of, your revenue per FTE was another good metric. Blair Enns was a
Yeah.
guy, was a book I was reading of his called Win Without Pitching, and he went on to write some other books, but he talked about revenue per FTE and how in agencies, if you hit a certain number, you could abolish the timesheets or you could make some other sort of incentive as long as we were hitting this good number. I think somewhere above, I don't know what the actual point system was he was using to score it, but it was an interesting one. Okay, cool. Looking to the future, are there any kind of breakthroughs that you can see, whether it's sort of technical or cultural, that you're most excited to see that you think's got the potential to really change the industry, ad industry, tech industry for the better?
I mean, I definitely am very fervent about the value creation that AI, in the broadest sense and in all its micro senses, is going to create for the advertising world. There's already so many great applications that are starting to be put into play. And I think the ability to do things more efficiently that was otherwise being done by just a lot of human hours. And it's not necessarily the most exciting or strategic or thoughtful work. I think brings a ton of value because it frees people up to do what people are really good at, which is think strategically, get really into the nitty gritty on something that deeply interests them instead of having to just like do certain administrative elements because they just need to get done. So really being able to plug that gap. And then I think a cultural shift that I have really latched onto and that I see a lot of people also latching onto, which excites me, is leading with curiosity instead of competition. So when you kind of come at something with a curious mind, or partnering or working with someone with a curious mind. And I mean, this is like, not something that I do perfectly or anyone, but you know, the opportunity truly is limitless. right? Because it's expansive versus coming at something with a competitive mindset, be it I'm building a business with competition, I'm going to beat them, or this person is doing this and I'm competing with them. Like you're actually limiting yourself, right? And then there's a winner or there's a loser, when in reality there's just a bunch of ways for everyone to win right now. And I'm seeing a lot of really cool partnerships coming across the board. Small companies partnering together, small and large companies partnering together, people getting really agile with leveraging their skill sets and the small kind of things that they're working on and all their little side hustles, interconnecting with each other into this like ecosystem web of value that is lifting all boats. And that can only be done with a curious mindset. It cannot be done with a competitive mindset. So that's been something culturally that I've noticed and really, really loving.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about the sort of mindset shifts that you would encourage, but I think you've answered that one brilliantly, from competitiveness to curiosity and maybe collaboration. I talk to my kids about how that in a school, if you're copying your friend's homework or you're looking at the answers in a test, that's actually quite a collaborative way to be working, and they should have at it. But looking at looking at me a bit puzzled, but I'm like, no, you'll understand it. Fantastic. All right, so let's start wrapping things up. I'd like to ask you the same question I asked my other guests at the end of their interview, which is, if you've got the whole world's attention for just 30 seconds, what would you say?
Oh my gosh, I would say be curious. Lead with curiosity. Think about how what you're doing can be expansive for what somebody else is doing. What somebody else is doing can be expansive for you, and what you're doing. And if everyone thinks like that, wow, like so much cool stuff is going to come out of it.
That's a really lovely way to close this out. Nola Solomon, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was great.